The familiar sting of family gatherings had become as predictable as the seasonal decorations adorning Mom's dining room. Every Thanksgiving brought the same ritual humiliation, carefully orchestrated by my sister Jessica and enthusiastically supported by our extended family. This year, seated at what Jessica had dubbed the kids' table despite being 32, I watched the annual performance unfold with practiced calm. "Look who finally showed up," Jessica announced as I entered the dining room, still wearing my work uniform from the transit company. "Did you take 3 buses to get here, or did someone actually give you a ride?" The question hung in the air like incense, drawing snickers from my cousins lined up along the main table. Jessica had positioned herself at the head, naturally, wearing what I recognized as a $3,000 designer dress that perfectly complemented her recently purchased BMW. She'd made sure everyone knew about both acquisitions through strategically timed social media posts over the past month. "Just one bus today," I replied, settling into the plastic chair that somehow always ended up being mine. "Traffic wasn't too bad." "One bus," Cousin Mark repeated with exaggerated sympathy. "At 32 years old. That's actually impressive dedication to public transportation." The laughter rippled around the table, each family member contributing their own observation about my transportation choices. Uncle Robert, Jessica's biggest supporter, raised his wine glass in mock salute. "To public transportation heroes," he declared. "Someone has to keep the bus companies in business." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes bright with the particular joy she reserved for these moments. "You know what I was telling Mom earlier? You'll probably never even own a car. I mean, at this point, what's the point in starting? You just default on the payments anyway." "That's probably true," I agreed, reaching for the cranberry sauce. "Cars are expensive." "Expensive," Jessica repeated, her voice rising with theatrical disbelief. "A used Honda Civic is expensive to you. Do you know what I spent on my BMW? $60,000. Cash." The table erupted in appreciative murmurs. Aunt Linda actually clapped. Jessica basked in the attention, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured toward the window where her car sat prominently in the driveway. "Some people have different priorities," I said, cutting into my turkey with steady hands. "Different priorities," Mark echoed, shaking his head. "That's one way to describe taking the city bus to family dinner. What happens when it's raining? Do you just get soaked, or do you call Mom for rides like you're 16? "I manage," I replied. Jessica's husband David joined the conversation, his voice carrying the particular smugness of someone who'd married into perceived superiority. "I actually saw Sarah at the bus stop last month when I was driving to the office. She was standing there in the rain with this little umbrella, looking so—" He paused, searching for the word. "Pathetic, honestly." The word hung in the air, sharper than Jessica's usual barbs. Mom finally looked up from her plate, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face, but she said nothing. Dad continued eating as if the conversation wasn't happening at all. "Pathetic might be a strong word," Jessica said, though her tone suggested she thought it was perfectly appropriate. "I prefer realistic. Some people just accept their limitations. There's nothing wrong with taking buses your whole life if that's all you can manage." "Absolutely nothing wrong with it," Uncle Robert agreed, his voice heavy with false sincerity. "Public transportation is very practical. Environmentally conscious too, probably." The conversation continued around me, family members taking turns offering their perspectives on my transportation choices, my financial situation, and my general life direction. I listened with the same calm attention I'd developed over years of similar gatherings, occasionally nodding or offering brief agreements when directly addressed. Jessica was building toward something bigger. I could tell by the way she kept glancing at her phone, checking the time. She had scheduled this humiliation, planned it around some specific moment that would maximize the impact. "You know what the really sad part is?" Jessica announced during a brief lull in the conversation. "Sarah actually thinks she's going to make it, somehow. She's always talking about her little business ideas and her investments." She used air quotes around the words, her voice dripping with condescension. "Investments," Mark repeated with a snort. "What kind of investments can you make on a bus driver's salary?" "I work dispatch, not driving," I corrected mildly. "Oh, dispatch," Jessica said, rolling her eyes. "That's so much better. Sitting in a little booth telling bus drivers where to go. Very executive level." The laughter that followed was sharper now, more focused. Jessica sensed blood in the water and pressed forward. Do you know what she told me last year? Jessica addressed the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. She said she was building something big. Building something big. Can you imagine? I asked her what exactly and she got all mysterious and vague. Typical Sarah. Building something big, David repeated mockingly. Like what? A better bus route. Maybe she's starting her own taxi service, suggested cousin Emily. With one of those beat-up cars that smells like cigarettes. She'd have to be able to afford a car first, Jessica pointed out. Which brings us back to the original problem. I continued eating, letting the conversation wash over me while keeping track of the time on my watch. 6:47 p.m. The timing was getting close to what I'd been expecting. The thing that really bothers me, Jessica continued, her voice taking on the slightly wounded tone she used when she wanted to seem reasonable while delivering particularly cruel observations, is the delusion. Like, I love Sarah, she's my sister, but someone needs to tell her the truth. You're 32, you take the bus everywhere, you live in that tiny apartment, you work dispatch for the city. That's your life. Accept it. Accept reality, Uncle Robert agreed, nodding sagely. There's dignity in accepting your place. Exactly, Jessica said, warming to her theme. Stop pretending you're going to suddenly become some kind of business mogul. It's embarrassing for everyone. The conversation had reached its crescendo. Jessica's annual moment of absolute authority over my perceived failures. Family members nodded around the table, comfortable in their shared understanding of the natural order. Jessica the successful one, Sarah the disappointment. My phone buzzed against my leg. 6:52 p.m. Right on schedule. I mean, look at this, Jessica continued, gesturing toward the window. Everyone else drove here tonight. Mom and Dad have their Toyota. Uncle Robert has his Cadillac, David and I have the BMW, Mark has his truck. And Sarah took the 47 bus and walked 6 blocks. In those shoes, Aunt Linda added, glancing down at my work boots with obvious distaste. In those shoes, Jessica agreed. Because she can't afford anything else. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But don't pretend it's temporary. Don't act like you're going somewhere else. This is it. The phone in my pocket buzzed again, twice in quick succession. The prearranged signal. You're right, I said, setting down my fork and reaching for my phone. I should probably be more realistic about transportation. Jessica's eyes lit up with triumph. She'd been building to this moment of complete capitulation, and I was delivering exactly what she'd hoped for. Finally, she said, spreading her hands as if she'd just performed a miracle. A little self-awareness. That's all I wanted. I looked at my phone screen, reading the message that had just arrived. Then I looked up at the table where 8 family members sat in various states of satisfaction at Jessica's successful demolition of my aspirations. You know what? I said, standing up from the plastic chair. You're absolutely right about the transportation thing. I should probably do something about that. Well, don't go buying anything you can't afford, Jessica said quickly, alarm creeping into her voice. I didn't mean you should go into debt for a car. Oh no, I assured her, walking toward the window where her BMW sat in the driveway. I'm not buying anything. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number that connected on the first ring. Williams Aviation, this is Captain Rodriguez. The conversation at the table died instantly. 8 pairs of eyes fixed on me as I spoke into the phone. Hi Captain, it's Sarah. Are we ready for pickup? Absolutely, Ms. Williams. We have 3 helicopters in the area. Landing zone is confirmed as the residential street you specified. 4 minutes. Perfect. Thank you. I hung up and turned back to the table, where my family sat in complete silence. Jessica's mouth was slightly open, her fork suspended halfway to her lips. What was that? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I ride home, I said simply, checking my watch. Should be here in about 4 minutes. Your ride home, Jessica repeated slowly as if testing the words for meaning. Who did you just call? My aviation manager, I replied, moving back to the table to collect my jacket from the back of the plastic chair. I figured you were right about the bus thing being a little embarrassing. Helicopters are probably more appropriate. The silence stretched out, broken only by the ticking of Mom's grandfather clock and the distant sound of approaching aircraft. David was the first to find his voice. Did you say helicopters? Plural. 3 tonight, I confirmed, slipping on my jacket. I like to have backup aircraft in case of mechanical issues. Uncle Robert's wine glass sat forgotten in his hand, a thin stream of red liquid dripping onto Mom's white tablecloth. Sarah, he said carefully, what exactly do you do for work? I own Williams Aviation, I said, smoothing down the front of my jacket. We operate helicopter services throughout the region. Medical transport, emergency services, executive transport, tourism flights. About 50 aircraft total. The sound outside was getting louder now, the distinctive whoop-whoop-whoop of helicopter rotors approaching at low altitude. Jessica's face had gone completely white. That's impossible, she whispered. You work for the City Transportation Department. I own the company that contracts services to the City Transportation Department, I corrected gently. Williams Aviation handles all their emergency helicopter services, executive transport and medical evacuations. The dispatch job is just how I keep track of our municipal contracts. The first helicopter appeared over the house, a sleek black aircraft with Williams Aviation printed in gold letters along the side. It circled once before settling onto the street in front of Jessica's BMW, the rotor wash sending fallen leaves swirling around her $60,000 car. Mark dropped his fork. Holy shit, he breathed. Language, Mom said automatically, though her eyes never left the window. The second helicopter touched down behind the first, followed quickly by the third. All 3 aircraft bore the same gold lettering, the same professional livery that I'd spent years perfecting. The pilots remained in their seats, rotors spinning at idle, waiting for their passenger. 50 aircraft, Aunt Linda repeated faintly. You said 50 aircraft. 53 actually, I said, pulling on my jacket. We just took delivery of 3 new medical helicopters last week. State-of-the-art equipment. Jessica stood up from her chair, her legs visibly shaking. This isn't real, she said. This is some kind of joke. You can't afford helicopters. You take the bus. I take the bus because it's environmentally responsible, I explained patiently. And because it gives me time to handle business calls without distractions. Helicopter fuel is expensive and the carbon footprint is significant. I only use air transport when it's necessary. David was staring at his phone, his face pale. Williams Aviation, he read aloud. Founded 2015. Regional Helicopter Services. Annual revenue. His voice trailed off. What? Jessica demanded. Annual revenue what? $47 million, David whispered. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Uncle Robert's wine glass finally slipped from his fingers, shattering against Mom's hardwood floor. 47 million, Jessica repeated, her voice barely audible. Last year's figures, I confirmed. This year we're tracking closer to 65 million. The new medical contracts really boosted our quarterly numbers. My phone buzzed. A text from Captain Rodriguez. Ready for departure, Ms. Williams. Well, I said, checking the message, I should probably head out. Early morning tomorrow. We're finalizing the contract to provide helicopter services for the new children's hospital. I walked toward the front door, pausing to look back at the table where my family sat in various states of shock. Jessica, I said gently, thank you for the advice about accepting reality. You were absolutely right. I should stop pretending to be something I'm not. What do you mean? She whispered. I should stop pretending to be broke, I said. It's been fun, but it's probably time I started living like someone who owns a $65 million aviation company. Jessica's designer dress suddenly looked less impressive. Her BMW, still visible through the window behind the 3 helicopters, seemed small and ordinary. The bus thing was never about money, I continued. It was about staying connected to the community we serve. But I think it's time to be more transparent about my situation. I opened the front door and the sound of the helicopters grew louder. The lead pilot had already climbed out and was walking toward the house, wearing a crisp uniform with captain's bars and my company logo. Ms. Williams, he said, snapping a sharp salute. Aircraft are ready for departure. Shall we proceed to the main office, or would you prefer to fly directly home? Home please, Captain Rodriguez, I said. It's been a long day. Of course, ma'am. Your aircraft is the center helicopter. I'll be your pilot tonight. I turned back toward the dining room, where 8 family members sat frozen in their chairs like figures in a tableau. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone, I said. Maybe next year we can discuss more realistic transportation options. I'm thinking about buying a private jet. The captain held the door open as I stepped outside into the rotor wash. The power of the 3 aircraft was incredible. The sound, the wind, the sheer presence of $15 million worth of helicopters sitting in front of Mom's modest suburban house. As I climbed into the passenger compartment of the center aircraft, I could see my family through the dining room window. They hadn't moved. Jessica still stood beside her chair, her mouth open, her hands gripping the back of her seat. David was staring at his phone. Uncle Robert was looking at the wine stains spreading across Mom's tablecloth as if it held the answers to everything. Captain Rodriguez settled into the pilot's seat and began his pre-flight check. "Everything all right, Ms. Williams?" he asked through the headset. "Everything's perfect, Captain," I said, settling back into the leather seat. "Let's go home." The helicopters lifted off in formation, rising above the suburban street where Jessica's BMW sat dwarfed by the landing zones we'd just vacated. Through the aircraft window, I could see lights coming on in houses throughout the neighborhood as residents stepped outside to investigate the source of the noise. My phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then several more in rapid succession. All from Jessica. "Sarah, what the hell? Call me right now. This is impossible. How long have you owned helicopters? Why didn't you tell us?" I turned the phone face down and watched the city lights spread out below us. Tomorrow I'd probably hear from the rest of the family. There would be questions, explanations demanded, relationships to navigate. But tonight, flying home in the center aircraft of my 3-helicopter fleet, I was just Sarah Williams, owner of Williams Aviation, heading home after another successful family dinner. The bus would still be there tomorrow if I wanted to take it. But something told me my transportation options had just expanded considerably. As we flew over the city, I could see the buses below, small and distant, carrying passengers to their destinations. I'd built my company around the idea that everyone deserved reliable transportation, whether they rode the bus or chartered a helicopter. But maybe it was time to stop riding the bus myself. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the headset. "EA to your residence is 12 minutes, Ms. Williams. Weather is clear, winds are calm. Perfect flying conditions." "Thank you, Captain," I replied, watching the city lights blur past the window. Perfect conditions indeed.